Our reading this morning comes from a piece entitled Inefficiency by the Black American author Ross Gay from his Book of Delights. I don't know if it's the time I've spent in the garden, spent, an interesting word, which is somehow an exercise in supreme attentiveness, staring into the oregano blooms wending through the lowest branches of the gumi bush and the big vascular leaves of the rhubarb, and also an exercise in supreme inattention, or distraction, I should say, or fleeting intense attentions, I should say, or intense fleeting attentions. Did I mention the hummingbird hovering there with its green gold breast shimmering, slipping its needle nose in the zinnia and zoom? Mention the pokeweed berries dangling the jewelry from a flapper mid-step. Mention the little black jewels of deerscat and the deer-shaped depressions in the grass and red clover. Uh-oh. I come from people for whom, as I write this, lounging, sipping coffee, listening to the oatmeal talking in the pot, efficiency was not mostly an option, I suppose, given being kind of broke and hustling to stay afloat with 2 kids and a car always breaking, and their own paper routes on top of their jobs and such, does not so much afford the delight of inefficiency. Though being broke and hustling to stay afloat most certainly occasions other mostly undelightful inefficiencies, such as my father driving from Philadelphia to Youngstown, Ohio every year to re-register his car in a state where they didn't have inspections. Because his 1978 Toyota Corolla, in my mind, one of the most beautiful cars ever made, the wagon, I mean, had 2 doors that didn't open and a hole in the floor, and was more or less a lattice work of rust. For instance, I love not getting the groceries in from the car in one trip. Or better yet, I love walking around the city, ostensibly trying to get somewhere, perhaps without all the time in the world, perhaps with, and despite the omniscient machine in my pocket frying my sperm, vibrating to remind me of said frying, just wandering. Maybe it's down this street. Maybe it's down this one. Maybe you're with a friend, and maybe the inefficiency will make you closer. Maybe it's a cafe you're looking for on Cambridge Street, which evidently doesn't exist until, drifting along, it does. And right down this block, across the street from a school where a trio of kids, a black girl with braids, a brown girl in a hijab, and a white girl with pigtails, shoot hoops. Here ends the reading.
Joy, 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 sing for joy, sing out and sing a joyful song, joyful song, sing joy.
There's a short Zen story in which a student seeking the way travels to meet with a Zen master and asks, "Please tell me the gate where I may enter." The Zen master says, "Do you hear the sound of the water in the creek?" "Yes," says the student. "Then enter there." Enter the gate through the sound of the flowing river. I invite you to imagine it now. Or like our reading this morning by Ross Gay, if you prefer, sitting in the garden, marveling at the hummingbird hovering before you. It is a moment of connection with the miracle of life, however fleeting. I imagine as I put myself in the role of the student in the Zen story, as I relax into the practice of listening to the water, I would feel some delight, and I would start to connect to that river or that hummingbird that Ross Gay beheld. I imagine my heart would fill with love and affection for that river as I relaxed and joined in its flow. Delight can be a doorway into love, into connection, just as simple as this. And this morning, I want to explore what it means to use delight as a practice to connect, to open our hearts to love, as inspired by the wonderful book by Ross Gay, The Book of Delights. Published in 2019, he explains the rules of the practice he created for himself in the preface. Quote, "One day last July, feeling delighted and compelled to both wonder about and share that delight, I decided that it might feel nice, even useful, to write a daily essay about something delightful. I remember laughing to myself for how obvious it was. I could call it something like the Book of Delights. I came up with a handful of rules: write a delight every day for a year, begin and end on my birthday, August 1st, draft them quickly, and write them by hand. The rules made it a discipline for me, a practice. Spend time thinking and writing about delight every day. It didn't take me long," he continues, "to learn that the discipline or practice of writing these essays occasioned a kind of delight radar. Or maybe it was more like the development of a delight muscle, something that implies that the more you study delight, the more delight there is to study. A month or two into this project, delights were calling to me, write about me, write about me. And because it is rude not to acknowledge your delights, I'd tell them that though they might not become essayettes, they were still important and I was grateful to them. Which is to say, I felt my life to be more full of delight. Not without sorrow or fear or pain or loss, but more full of delight. I also learned this year that my delight grows, much like love and joy, when I share it." End quote. What a rich set of instructions here he offers. He created some rules for himself to have a discipline, a daily practice. Nothing too demanding, nothing too painful. It's about training oneself to become more aware of the delights that are all around us, to acknowledge and write about those delights. And then, voila, there is more delight. How does that happen? Well, he may have made some changes in the way he went about his day, I imagine, in his actions, and certainly in his attention and awareness to pick up on more delight. But we also know that there are changes that happen in the brain when we pay attention to the pleasant and happy moments in life, such as delights, or just those moments we are grateful for. The neuropsychologist Rick Hanson and neurologist Richard Mendius do a great job explaining how this works in their book called The Buddha's Brain, The Practical Neuroscience of Happiness, Love, and Wisdom. In it, they explain that our evolution has left us primed to focus on the negative in life, because it's the negative experiences, not the positive ones, that have generally had the most impact on survival. Our brains preferentially scan for, register, store, recall, and react to unpleasant experiences in the hopes that that will increase our chances of survival. Stay away from that. That snake, that person might be dangerous. Is there a storm coming? You get the picture. We need to be able to detect danger to stay alive, and so our brains have become hyper-focused on the negative, and the negative experiences stick, whereas the positive ones slide off, and we often forget about them. So even when positive experiences outnumber negative ones, the pile of negative implicit memories naturally grows faster. What does this mean? Implicit memory means that the background feeling, what it feels like to be us, can become undeservedly glum and pessimistic. Hanson and Mendius, who are both Buddhist meditators, suggest that to correct this imbalance, the solution is not to suppress the negative experiences, because suppression always backfires, but rather to foster the positive ones in 3 steps that overlap remarkably with Ross Gay's practice of delight. Number 1, turn positive facts into positive experiences by noticing them. Pretty easy, right? Actively look for the positive, particularly the little stuff, the faces of children, the smell of an orange. Number 2, stay with the experience and savor it for a bit. 5, 10, 20 seconds even. This will make the memory stronger, especially by staying with the positive emotions and the body's sensations of the experience. Number 3, this is my favorite, soak it in. Really relax and absorb it. Engage your imagination in this and think about what's good about it. As the late Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh put it, suffering is not enough. He writes, quote, "Life is filled with suffering, but it is also filled with many wonders, like the blue sky, the sunshine, the eyes of a baby. To suffer is not enough. We must also be in touch with the wonders of life. They are within us and all around us, everywhere, anytime. If we are not happy, if we are not peaceful, we cannot share peace and happiness with others. even those we love, those who live under the same roof." End quote. To feel peace, to feel happiness, to feel delight. This is an important part of what it means to cherish being alive, I think. It is a good in and of itself, and it can be an act of self-love. The benefits ripple out within our body and our soul and beyond to others. But more than that, to share peace, to share happiness and joy and delight truly is a great gift to give, is it not? And to do that, we must have the experience inside ourselves to share. We cannot fully share peace, happiness, or love without some experience, some knowledge, some taste of it within ourselves. I saw Ross Gay doing all of this in his book, but I saw him doing more as well. When we experience peace, joy, love, and delight, it can also be specifically about our connections to others, and it can help us open our hearts to the love and appreciation we have for the world in this way. To discover that love we have inside ourselves for other people, plants, birds, animals, for life with a capital L in all its beautiful and varied forms. This is where I became particularly interested in his practice, and Ross Gay explores this beautifully in his writing. Consider his entry March 1st, entitled Reading Palms. He describes how on that day he was passing through airport security and set off an alarm so that he needed to be patted down intrusively. In this otherwise highly awkward moment, he found an opening and an opportunity for delight, some connection and some humor as well. While being patted down by the security guard, they got to talking, and Gay shared that he was going to Syracuse to read poems. At this, the man looked up from his work, patting him down, and said enthusiastically, "You must be good at that if they fly you around to do it." I was feeling good about myself as we finished, writes Gay. He then, quote, "He then told me about his mother taking him to have his poems read, which made us even closer than we already were. He was talking about longer lines and shorter ones, and some broken ones, all of which, admittedly, I was distracted from, given I was cutting it close, checking my watch and listening for the boarding call. Finally, the security guard said, "I never believed in it myself, but I know some people do," dismissing me at last, and I laughed and nodded, overhearing him saying to one of his colleagues as I jogged toward my gate, "Hey, Mike, that guy is being flown to Syracuse to read palms." What a great story. The misunderstanding, of course, is a delight in and of itself. But I can also imagine not coming away from that interaction in such a good mood, given the possibility of missing my flight and the intrusiveness of the search. But his interest in being human and connecting to another human, and I think his practice of allowing the possibility of delight to exist, even within a system that does not usually make anyone feel cared for, works some magic there. So this is why I say opening the door with delight. I invite us to consider delight not just as a way to experience pleasure, but as a practice of connection and as a sort of radar to find meaning, care, and love in this world. What brings delight? On November 26th, for Ross Gay, it was a witnessing of two people sharing the burden of carrying a shopping bag by each gripping one of the handles so that they had to walk kind of staggering together. Even when, especially when, he writes, it's unnecessary to do so. That is a delight. It is an act of connection, of affection and love. So I've been adding a bit of this practice into the mix of my outdoor meditations that I do in the garden. And I was amazed at how quickly I found it beneficial. Savoring the delight of connecting with a red hawk perched in the tree, not 40 yards in front of me. After noticing a few more delights, I found myself taking a little longer to savor the fact that a red cardinal flew down to perch on a branch outside my window yesterday as I was sitting at my dining room table. Just took it in a little bit more. What a delight. It opened my heart, and I cared more about that bird after savoring that delight, the delight of seeing it. A few final thoughts. It is important, I think, that at the end of the preface he writes that through this practice, quote, I felt my life to be more full of delight, not without sorrow or fear or pain or loss, but more full of delight, end quote. The sorrow, fear, pain, and loss that he writes about as well and experienced that year of his writing is not insignificant. As a black man, he writes about the impacts of racism often. He writes about tragedy and death. But through it all, he insists on finding delight and joy in his interactions with strangers, his observations of the vulnerabilities and particularities he discovers over and over again in life. He finds connections and delight within and sometimes arising out of the shared sorrow, pain, and loss that he doesn't shrink away from. Finally, consider the title of the reading from this morning, Inefficiency. The inefficiency of sitting in the garden, just enjoying the sunlight, or the inefficiency of meandering down the street without consulting a map, as we heard about. I found the book a beautiful reminder that we must be willing to step off the treadmill, so to speak, to savor a cup of tea, the bird in the window, the smile of a friend, a hug with a loved one. Even and especially because this does not contribute to the economy, does not make us any money. That in and of itself is a delight. How much richer do we become in joy, in love of life, in relationships that have meaning beyond the merely transactional, when we slow down enough to allow ourselves the opportunity to connect. Otherwise, what's it all for? There are so many of these doorways to connection, opportunities to connect when we slow down. Delight is one way in. And with practice, we get better at it, just like with everything. We can cultivate delight. a wonderful thing in its own right, but also a doorway that opens our hearts to love and connection, and that brings us back to the joy of being human, simply being alive, to what really matters. So may we practice finding delight alone and together. May it warm our souls and open our hearts. May it be a doorway into greater connection and greater love. Amen.